Hi, welcome to the Daiku Podcast. I'm Gary Snow. Today I welcome Gordon Johansen, the owner of the Sentry Box, which was featured in the documentary Friendly Local Game Store. And at the time of filming, it was the world's largest store. Gord has been the owner of the Sentry Box now for over 40 years, seeing many ups and downs in the industry, and he's built a tremendous community around the store. Gord, welcome.
Good morning, Gary. Thanks for having me again.
Well, for those that don't know, I was actually the director-producer of the documentary Friendly Local Game Store, and the Sentry Box is located right here in Calgary, Alberta, where I am from, and Gord has been from for a number of years, and it's like truly the hub of gaming in the community. And Gord, before we get down to the how you started the Sentry Box and all the ups and downs over the years, how did you actually get started in the hobby?
I think it was probably grade 7 or something like that, and a friend introduced me to Stratego, and then we went, or then I picked up Tactics 2 or Blitzkrieg, one of the Avalon Hill board games, and by the time D&D came out, that was the cool thing in the War Games Club to try out back in 74. I still have my wood grain brown box from way back when, from the first printing on that.
And were you always kind of into that kind of world of like fantasy and Tolkien and all that kind of stuff?
I loved Tolkien, read through that in junior high. Took many trips to the library because it was pretty trendy way back then and hard to get out. But yeah, that and history. Yeah, 'cause science fiction fantasy has always been my go-to reading thing ever since about grade 6. And history, back growing up being born in 56, the closer you are to World War II, I think, the more interested you were in that period.
And then I know it's in the documentary, but for those that have not seen the documentary, and I will put links into the documentary, which you can watch for free on YouTube. I'll share the links here.
And it's an amazing show. Gary, you did an incredible job with that. It blew everybody away, I got to say.
Well, it was definitely a labor of love, and I love the store, and I love everything that you've done in building up a community there in the store, which we'll talk about shortly. But in the documentary, you talk about like the early days of like how did the Sentry Box actually get started?
Do you mean since I've owned it? Because I actually did not start it. Or from the very, very beginning?
Well, maybe from the very beginning, and then when did you come into the picture?
It was started about 73, I think, and it literally was the size of a Sentry Box by a woman by the name of Liz Crane, who was really at the time a bored housewife and used to sell the 54 millimeter miniatures. I think she had a friend in this bookstore. It was 10 foot by 10 foot, like I say, with her desk and some stuff on the walls. And she brought in war games. She did that for a couple of years, basically then closed it. I think she got into it because her son and husband were into it. But then closed it. Somebody else bought it, ran it for a couple of years. And in 78, I started wholesaling through a different company after I bought a house. And I wanted some tax dodges so you could write off the mortgage. Anyway, and I started wholesaling to some of the different stores and things as well. Initially, it was just out of the trunk of my car, but did that and then decided, no, the guy who owned it at that point, he knew nothing about games. He was just bored. You used to think it was the bored old guy, and I'm, 25 years older than he was probably at the time now. But I talked him into selling it to me. So on January 1st, 1980, took it over. I think it cost me 10 grand for the stock and 10 grand for the goodwill. But he was kind of curmudgeonly, so I don't know how much goodwill there was. And I kind of went from there.
And that location, like the original location, and you were selling out of the back of your car at some points before that, but the original location, it was quite small. And how many locations now over the years have you moved from that?
Yeah, the first one was, my part of it was 250 square feet because he was selling models on consignment for a guy on the other half of it. And so within a month became the 450, which is what I think it of. And then we moved to 1,400, then bought a building at 2,800, and ran both the wholesale and the store out of there till it got too big, and then the store turned into the 2,800, and then we jumped to the 13,000 on the main, or the new building, the current one, and then moved the card section over to the front of that, where there was another 6,000 square feet over there. So at one point it was the full 19,000. Officially now it's only 13,000 again.
And then maybe this is a good time to actually share the trailer for those that are going to be watching on YouTube, just to get a sense of the scale and the size of the Sentry Box. So I'll play that now, and then we'll come back and we'll just talk a little bit more about that.
Okay.
The circle of board gaming, I think we call this the FLGS, the Friendly Local Game Store.
No, I didn't expect Sentry Box to be the way it is now.
Remembering when Gord was wholesaling and selling out of the back of his vehicle.
Lo and behold, he had all sorts of games and dice and everything he could want in his trunk of his car.
There was a little hole in the wall.
A little box of mystery, a lot of things kind of going on there that you didn't quite understand, but as a kid, you were like, yeah, I want to be a part of this.
Don't forget, 25 years ago, gaming was not that big a deal, let alone 40 years ago.
They went crazy, and they keep expanding, they keep shifting.
When someone comes in and they've never seen the store before, and you see them pause and watch and look.
Most of them say like, wow, or oh my gosh, and they'll like pull out their phone and ask if it's okay to take a photo. I'm like, absolutely, please do.
You're just like presented with this plethora of nerddom.
We want this to be a place that people find cool, they want to come here.
When a customer comes in and they're like, oh, wow, that is so cool, you kind of have to be like, you're right, it's so cool.
Say goodbye to your wallet.
And to your free time, you're going to get hobbies.
People were making pilgrimages. It was, well, they still do, I should say. But
there's something unique about Calgary and the Sentry Box.
I think it's very uncommon for a city of this size to have a gaming store like this, something that's so big, so well stocked, so well established.
Over 47 years, all my circle of friends are all gamers.
The parents are talking about how when they were teenagers, they were, bugging their parents to bring them to the Sentry Box on the weekends so they could pick up the latest D&D book, and now they're bringing their kids.
And that's very much what this place is. It is the collective dreams and visions of dozens and dozens of people, all condensed, trickled, sent through a filter on down to what we see here. And you don't get to see very many collective works like that.
It's a very special place, even outside of just being an FLGS.
Life can change, things can come and go, jobs can change, yet this place manages to remain a constant.
It's an accepting, open place where you can just be you, right? And there's not very many places like that out there.
Looking at that trailer and the sheer scale of that, how many square feet did you say the store is?
13,000 in the main store, and then there's 6,000 on the other card side as well.
And that was a huge jump, like to go from the original store to that store. And do you remember the decision-making process at that time? Like when I know you had some, like as mentioned in the trailer, like, wow, it was a big store.
Yeah, it's always amazes me when I see some of the pictures of the construction going on and the outside of the building, and it's like, holy crap, that looks big. But yeah, I mean, the first to the second, we just needed more space, and that was kind of the same from the second to the third, because that was the one we first bought a building. But it wasn't that much bigger. But going from the 2,800 square feet to the 13,000 in the whole building, and having to basically do all the construction, yeah, it was a little daunting because, let's say, costs and overruns and things like that were somewhat of a issue. compared to the actual cost of the building. Because when we moved in, all there was the brick walls and a steel roof and the cement floors. That was pretty well it. So yeah, it was an interesting time, especially when both myself and my minority partner at the time had just had children born during the construction process. We don't remember much of the first year, maybe, of our daughters' lives.
Well, and one of the benefits of having that much space is you had that space to allow people to come and play and to have, like, you know, book signings and like space to play with, in essence, and allow the store to grow into that. But at first, did you even have enough stock to kind of fill in all that?
Amazingly enough, yes. The previous place with the 2,800 square feet, the floors were literally starting to bow from the weight, because they were wooden floors. And I discovered after that some of the local other stores would send new staff over to show them how much stuff you could actually fit on a shelf. But yeah, it surprised me actually how like instantly it looked pretty full again. I mean, we've made a lot of changes, and we've actually taken out some of the spots that we had as kind of sealed off, like we had a shop area, and that became the bookstore some years ago. You know, things like that. We always designed it with the mezzanine in play, because that was a big kind of, you know, about 3,000 square feet or square foot area. And then there was an after hours, what we considered a gaming room, where people could come and go if they had, you know, were a club or something like that, because that's where the bathrooms were. But yeah, it was designed so people could also play up there. So it's not all retail, obviously.
Well, I know that I've told this story before on different interviews when we were like, as we were featured in the film festival, and you know, the news was covering us. And one of the stories for myself, my own personal anecdote, is that I had moved here from the neighboring province, and obviously I was like, you know, a D&D geek, but for whatever reason, I didn't know the Sentry Box existed. And it's not too far away from where I live, and you know, sometimes I'd go on these long walks, and I was walking and I saw the dragon on the side of the store, and that piqued my interest, and I was like, huh, this is interesting. What the hell is the Sentry Box? And at first I thought it was like maybe a storage unit,
yeah,
place or something, because it's such a large warehouse. It's almost like it must be a storage unit thing. But then I went up there and I opened the door and I came out on the mezzanine, and much like it was featured in the documentary, I was like shocked. I was blown away that this existed. I had lived in Calgary for probably a year at that point, and I had not known about it for whatever reason. And I went in there and I was shocked, and immediately I took a picture and I sent it to all my old D&D friends over the years and said, holy smokes, like, look at this. It was like Shangri-La. And that is a common theme about everybody that goes into the Sentry Box for the first time. And maybe you can just talk about like that evolution of like the bare white walls and the early days to like where it's come now as far as decorations, layout, and just everything that you have going on in there.
Yeah, at the beginning, you're right. It was, well, actually, I think they were a kind of a pale pink, super pale pink wall at the time, a little darker. You know, I'm not a designer, so I go with what other people say. Anyway, it was pretty bare up there, but it was big, so it was impressive at the time. And then probably about 10 years ago now, one of my staff said, hey, I did this kind of design thing for somebody in their basement. He showed me pictures of these Egyptian kind of walls, and said, could we do something like that here? Would you be interested in paying for, you know, having me do that? And I went, well, that looks really cool. It has nothing to do with anything we sell. And I said, but let's do it anyway. So we started with that, and that was the first real, what I would consider of the big decor changes. Then we added on to it afterwards, and there's Cam did that, and Mike, one of my other staff, helped him, and then Cam kind of took over most of the other decor. It's just been a very gradual and slow project, because, you know, he could be making a lot more money doing other things, but it's kind of a common theme is that, you know, people who've done things for the store one way or the other, they just kind of like doing it because they feel like it's part, I've had relatives of him come by and his mother brings in the aunts and things like that. It's like, this is what my son did. It's really cool that way. Because we could never afford to do all that kind of stuff, but it's everybody's labor of love, like the documentary you did.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be part of the Sentry Box family in even a small way, because it truly is a family. You have your two daughters that have both worked there and and are contributing in their own way to the whole thing. And I couldn't help but be like, it's very obvious that the people that work there have a passion for the hobby. They have a passion for the store. They have a passion for the community that has been built around there. That evolution over time, like reflecting upon it as was showcased in the documentary, did it ever surprise you to think of going from that small little store, the 10-foot by 10-foot store, now to this and the community that has been built around it?
No, because I used to be a power engineer, and when I was doing the wholesale thing out of my basement, I kind of figured, I got to do a store. I want to do a store as well. I said, that'll be my goal for when I'll retire out of this business 35. But then I did the store thing a year and a half later, and so yes, it was kind of a surprise, and part of it comes because I can't get rid of crap. I mean, I still have a game there from 44 years ago, from when I first got the place in 1980. It's a dog, but it's kind of sentimental at this point. I think we've reshrinked it 3 times now from shelfware.
Well, I always want to dive into your archives because I love, older games. And so once in a while I'll go in there, and there's always these older games that kind of magically appear on the shelves. And I went, well, where have those been sitting for like the last 40 years that you're now just bringing them out? And like, these are games that you would find on eBay or like, RPG auctions or something like that, where I go and they're just there. They're Star Frontiers, like mint kind of Star Frontier boxes. And it makes me go, well, where do they come from? And how much do you still have just tucked away, stored away, that you finally go, oh, well, we should bring those out and sell those?
Well, most of that stuff has actually been out. We're actually changing it a little bit because let's face it, they don't sell except to collectors and things like that, or people who are trying to finish collections because they've worn out their Star Frontiers modules or whatever. And I don't think we have any Star Frontiers right now. So if you're watching, don't try asking.
don't call.
But the problem is that they take up a huge amount of wall space, just in general. And we have some used sections for the historical or for the RPG stuff, things like that, and the collectible like Games Workshop stuff now, because those have definitely got a market for them. But the actual new stuff, there's still tons of it in the back area. We're actually doing a big move on that kind of stuff. I'm going to be putting it more on the website and literally just putting a department called archive.
Well, I'm like I said, I love going in there because there's stuff that I didn't even know this was a game. And like, here it is, like, fairly mint condition. And it's like the history of games, like all there. Maybe I should say role-playing games and actually wargaming. And I know your office is in the second level. You've got your kind of like your secret bunker, I would call it, in the back of the store in the wargaming section. And, some of the older folks that come to the store, I know like that's the hot spot where they'll come and visit you, and that's where your office is. And like they talk war games and that kind of stuff with you. And maybe talk about the different sections of the store that you've built up.
Yeah, well, that particular section is, you make it sound like I actually have a real office up there. I have a desk at the top of the stairs where we put there just more for security at the time. But yeah, that's the historical section, because there's the the old and new war game, and that's about 2,000 square feet up there of that stuff, plus the historical miniatures and the books, which have really slowed down over the last few years, of course, and we've been kind of phasing those down a little bit. But yeah, so that's the big section. It's kind of the quieter one, which is why I kept my desk up there for less interruptions. But let's just say that some of the older customers are a little more garrulous in the conversation, but they're also well trained. So if I have to do something and I'm working on something, they will respect that, shall we say? Because I'll say, I'm listening, but I got to be typing, doing stuff. Yeah. And yeah, that is somewhat a little more, it's not hidden, but people just don't realize that it's there. But then there's like the Games Workshop section, which is pretty massive because we sell a ton of that. I think we may be, we are, or we were, or whatever, are the single largest account. Doesn't mean you get any better service sometimes, but so that's a big section, and we sell a ton of that. Then we've got kind of the miniatures, like the tactical miniatures, or game systems like BattleTech, or some of the other games like oh god, now I'm blanking. Song of Ice and Fire, and all the various tactical miniature sections. Then the board game section is right in the middle, which all the Euro games kind of thing. There's a small kids game section sort of attached to that. There's the dice, which didn't used to be a section, but there's a whole area for dice and accessories, and we sell a ton of that stuff. Then there's the RPG section, the fantasy miniatures section, and which is more for the RPGs, obviously, and then the book section for the science fiction and fantasy books, which sadly we're shrinking again, just because people are. It's more of a that's one of my labors of love, because I like books and I like book people, and they got me cheap books for many years, but we're slowly shrinking that down.
Well, in the actual book section itself, like, it would put many bookstores just to shame on their own. It's like not a Barnes and Noble size, but like a little.
Yeah, there's about 7,000 titles.
Yeah, it's like a big bookstore, and that's just like science fiction, fantasy books, not anything to do with games or anything like that.
Yeah, well, even from the beginning, I made the call to not return anything. Usually they just rip off the cover and send it back after a certain while. And we've certainly done that on something, but we'd always keep a couple. And if it goes out of print, we never sent them back as a rule. We just kept them. So that was one of the neat features, but we ran some reports recently and went, okay, how many of these have we not sold in this period of time? And when there was half of them had not been sold in 5 years, it's like, okay, time for a sale. Last chance, guys. On these. So we're gonna start doing that just to try shrink some of the stuff down.
And you went through all the different sections and talked about what they have, but each one of these sections, going back to Cam's work on the decor, it's like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. As far as you go in there, in the historical section, it looks like during World War II, bombed out Italian French village.
Right. Yeah, we actually had one guy make a comment when we did the one wall up, and he said, "Oh man, this is reminding me of Bosnia when I was over in Yugoslavia." Just with the bullet holes and everything in there. And it's like, oh my God, I hope you're not having PTSD from that. It's like, oh no, it's fine.
And you've got a Darth Vader statue. You've got like a Warhammer costume that's been converted into I guess more like a statue now.
Yeah, well, it's still just a costume, but it was a blood angel, as I recall. That's what it was. Yeah, one of my customers did that and went, do you want me to put this in here? Because I've worn it a few conventions, and it's an amazing looking thing, right?
And you've got other sculptures and different things all around the store. The owlbears, dragons, you name it. Like, there's different things hanging there. Do you ever get to the point where you go, like, we're running out of wall space now to do stuff?
Oh, I've been running out of wall space for 30 years. But there's always the decor stuff is more fun because you're not using sellable wall space in many ways. Not like some places where you got the 30-foot ladder you got to go up to find the books in some section, or the various long poles to lift down T-shirts that you see at conventions for some of the big companies. So there's still lots of room for that, for the fun stuff, and that's what it is, really, is fun stuff. It's just kind of cool.
And then when we were filming the documentary, you were working on that like private back room for like booking games or like event space or like meeting space. And at the time it was under construction, but now that's all done. And you have like groups that use that on a frequent basis.
Yeah, it was going to be more for the evening stuff, because when we were doing that, it was through COVID, just to make, and switching all the LEDs out. Let's take advantage of the time and putting in new and better and more bathrooms kind of stuff. You might as well use that moment. But that particular one, because we've stayed open till 10:30 now, except for Sunday nights. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose of using that for an after hours gaming room. So people can book the tables in there. And we made the conscious decision. It's like, okay, we got to start paying for some of this stuff somehow. And so we put a minor booking fee on for tables, but we always kept a couple, I think probably about a third of the space open for, drop-in gaming. It's just that we, waxing the floors and doing all that stuff does cost money. So I kind of like to recoup a little bit of it. But yeah, so we do rent that out for people on but Sunday nights is pretty well the only time we can do it now.
And I believe it's got like a Wild West theme, kind of like
yeah, there's all wooden distressed planks on there, but it's kind of almost a Wild West steampunky kind of thing, because they're like steel wall things with kind of a corrugated kind of thing on there. And I don't know, my personal love was the new bathrooms. Finally, after all these years, because it's hard to close the only public bathroom to renovate and add it, because we had to rip down the floors and put new piping in. All the stuff you don't think about as a customer.
And on top of that back room, you also have like a card game. And I'm not a card gamer, but you do have a Magic the Gathering kind of card area. And how does that partnership work? Because I know you don't officially kind of like get in there.
It's been officially transitioned. I mean, it took about 6 years to get that sort of done. But it's under separate ownership now, which means I don't have to do the books for it anymore. So that makes me happy. That's one of the main reasons of moving it. They're still renting the space. In retrospect, we probably should have changed the name when they moved into that side of the building, because it's confusing for customers is the big thing. Because they literally will walk by and walk in and go, this isn't much of a game store if they're looking for board games. Or they walk into the main section because they're on different sides of the building and the sidewalk. And the guys will come into the main section. Where's your Magic cards? I thought you had Magic cards and Pokemon and stuff like that. So there's a lot of flow back and forth. And, sometimes you get rave reviews for the other side, and you have to, on Google, and you have to politely say, it's a separate business. I appreciate the 5 stars, but you should give it to them. And vice versa if it's a 1 star.
Well, at the time, in the documentary, we didn't actually feature the card gaming section, but it's like massive, just like the books part. Like, I mean, it's a standalone store in this building with its own private entrance. The card area, I mean, many communities would be happy to just have that store, the card game store, unto itself. And here it is, just part of the massive building that the Sentry Box holds.
Yeah, there's 3,000 square feet up on that one, and then another 3,000 of event space downstairs. That's one of the reasons we wanted to move it out of the main store, because the Magic events were getting too big, and you get like 170 people in sometimes. I mean, it's bad enough with I shouldn't say bad, but I mean, I think our record was still 92 people for D&D one Wednesday in pre-COVID, and they're kind of coming back again to those levels.
And we built it when we did the documentary, the world's largest game store. And in subsequent times now, you've mentioned that, maybe you aren't the world's largest game store anymore, but who would have tried to take that mantle over from you?
There's a place called Millennium Games down in New York, owned by Travis Severance, I think is his last name. Super nice guy. We've certainly met before and stuff. He ran a good store for a lot of years, and he just moved to 23,000 or something. They carry a much broader spectrum. So he bills himself as the the US's largest game store, and then we'll still bill ourselves as Canada's largest game store. But they carry a lot of other stuff in sort of related to gaming in some ways, like disc golf is a huge section for that. And they still, of course, carry all the Magic and have a big event space as well. So,
well, unless you're challenged, unless they can beat you, let's still call Sentry Box the biggest game store. We want that title for the documentary. And maybe now would be a good time to reflect. You mentioned COVID, and that's just one of the ups and downs of the business cycles over all the years. Reflecting upon that and the highs and lows of the industry, because I remember, like, just when original D&D came out, it was like such a big push, and then second edition it started to fall. But like, tell us in your mind, like, how were you able to ride out all these different highs and lows and changes and styles of games?
The big things, I would say, is the variety of departments we had. Because if you were into D&D, and then Magic came along, well, we were still selling Magic, but there's still the D&D core things. I mean, there was a section or point where you lost customers to EverQuest. I mean, that's long gone, because people got so addicted to that computer game, and then it just became part of the genre. The reality is, if you get tired of historical board games or science fiction books or whatever, you've still got gaming in the blood. I mean, you know that. It's like, can you imagine your life without playing games? No, exactly. And so you'd flip to something else. So we always had a lot of stability just because of that. The bigger problem was more the space and the stock levels continually growing. Because I mean, there's $1 million worth of inventory in there at my cost. And I like to say that most of the old stuff is just advertising, because it may not sell, but it sure looks good on the walls. And you get those moments like when you come in, people come take pictures. That's how we tell when somebody's never been in before and they're from another city. Initially, is they just walk in and they stand and they lean on that railing, and just for 5 minutes they'll just stand there and look and go, "Oh my God." We had one guy came in. I didn't see this, but my staff told me about a couple from, he was from Winnipeg, and a couple from Calgary brought him to the store because they knew he'd like it. And he just stood there and started to cry. It's like, okay, maybe we have more of an impact than I think on people, because it's just the store to me, right? It's just,
well, yeah, you almost take it for granted after a while that, like, how impressive of a store it is. And when people do come in for the first time, and there's people that make pilgrimages from across Canada, North America, and they come into this place and they are like, I wish I had this in my community. I cannot believe this even exists, to be frank with you.
Yeah. It's funny when people come in from Europe that way too. So, so we get a lot of international people. Well, not a lot, but a bunch will pop in during Stampede as well, or at any times of the year,
And maybe for people listening, this would be a good time to, we mentioned Calgary, and you just mentioned the Calgary Stampede. And Calgary is in Western Canada. It's kind of like it's like the Denver of Canada. So it's like just off the Rocky Mountains and in the prairies. But in the winter, obviously, it gets cold. And I asked this question during the documentary of, did that play into the success of the store, that come wintertime, like, people kind of huddle up and they play games, and like they can't go outside as much because it's like too cold? How much of a factor do you think Calgary and its weather might have had into the success of the store?
It's hard to say. In some ways, I think it was more the continuity, but the weather helps, because if you're not into skiing in the wintertime, or some other outdoor winter sport, you need to do something. And just having been there for so long, people get introduced to, then introduce more people to the hobby. So Calgary's got a big market, which is why the used game section does well. As people approach my age, they're trying to downsize. So I think it definitely has an impact. I was at Phoenix one time and went into a game store, and it was, much smaller, much quieter. And I asked them, it's like, do you guys, do a good business, etc.? He says, well, yeah, the weather's so nice down here. But I'm thinking to myself, you know what? It's 40 above outside. I think 40 above is just as bad, if not worse, than 40 below in many ways. So you'd think it would be kind of just a different seasonal kind of thing. I see it more in a place, or your point, more in a place where it's a mid-temperature thing where even in a place like Denver, it's not going to get that cold, is the reality. So you can just still go for nice walks and do whatever outside, or have more snowball fights than we will at 40 below, because the snow doesn't stick together at 40 below.
And for the folks that are from the US, we're talking Celsius because we're up in Canada. So
it's the same. That's why I say 40 below. It's the same Celsius or Fahrenheit.
Yeah. And when you were saying 40 above, for us, that's like whatever Arizona heat is, that 40 Celsius.
About 104 or something.
Yeah, too hot for Canadians.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been 104 at a game convention in the U.S.
Yeah,
outside and it was a wall.
Yeah, well, I'm going to Iceland, and I was happy to see. I'm going to Iceland next week, and for 10 days. And I was happy to see, I was looking at the temperatures there. Their highs are like 16, 17 Celsius, which is perfect by my standards, because like Calgary here has been like up to 35 degrees Celsius in the summertime, which is just hot for me. And I was complaining about I don't have air conditioning, but for 3 weeks out of the year when it gets hot, I guess we can just suck it up.
Yeah. And a friend of mine just did that, and she was so happy because she's pregnant right now, coming into the 8th month or 9th month.
And over the years, like all the highs and lows, and like in Euro games, and like there's always been something to kind of fill in and become popular.
Yeah.
But the people over the time, like from the people that still visit you in the historical section and come to chit chat with you and have been customers for 40 years. How has the demographics changed over the years between all these variables and new types of games?
Well, it used to be the demographics of the store were kind of that, when I started with like the 20 to 30 year olds, or 16 to 30 year olds maybe in that period. And it just kept going. The 16-year-olds still stayed there, but we just kept getting older, some of us, but there were still people show up every week doing this or that. And so I think we just spread to more of a demographic. And the other big thing was, of course, with D&D 5e and the Euro games, because allowing much more accessibility to women in the hobby, because it was all guys back in the original days. And I can remember we had one quite attractive woman working for us at one point at the magic counter. And she said, "You got to take me off this counter." And it's like, why? Because some of these guys are afraid to come up and buy. Which fortunately things have changed since then. And it's much more of I think it's probably still about a 45-55 split. But even pre-COVID, D&D was 40% female players. So, which was been amazing to see. And the Euro games are kind of the same kind of thing as far as I'm concerned. I mean, both my daughters play Euro games and D&D. In fact, we have D&D booked for today's Friday, right? Tomorrow.
Well, and you've been, and that's great. I mean, you continue to play throughout all these years, and you play as a family, and which is awesome as well. And I keep thinking about, like, every time I went in there for filming or like, doing some B-roll, and I would see these, multi-generations of people coming in, and the kids doing their thing, the parents doing their things, or doing it together and playing together. And I mean, that was for me, one of the maybe more emotional parts, is just how the love of gaming had been passed along.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be really cool when I would get the second generation coming in, which is, I mean, when I had kids, that's when we put in the kids section, because I hated just the stupidity of snakes and ladders, other than to learn how to take turns and count, because there was no skill in it. But now it's third generation coming in. And sadly, some of that first generation are dying off, which is, I think, a bit of a point of concern for some of my customers in general. It's like, how long is he going to keep doing this?
Well, maybe that's a good time to bring up the fact that people keep kind of going, well, how long can Gord maintain this? I know you've joked about building a condo or something like that attached to the building so that you can just like ride down the elevator to play games in your retirement.
Yeah, that was my two towers idea from Lord of the Rings, and we had enough space to do it if I took out the one lot beside us. But I didn't really have the $110 million. But it was all planned out for game storage and everything in various, because that's the problem with living in apartments. But no, so no, I'm not bothering with that. I'm too old for that now because I'm 67 and a half, let's call it. So I could have retired a few years ago, and that it was fun when I started kidding with people when I was getting ready to turn 65, and then I would be chatting like this and just stop and say, man, I don't know what you guys are going to do when I turn 65 at Christmas, and close the store and sell the building and retire. And about half of them were immediately, no, you're not allowed. And the other half would turn white until they'd see my mouth twitch. And it's like, bastard, don't do that to me. But my family lives forever. So, and I'm working on having my older daughter as more the backup, because I kind of said last summer, okay, you guys don't want me to sell this building, but let's face it, realistically, we have to make some plans at this age to go on. And there's like, oh, it's an institution or whatever, you can't do this. And it's like, fine, then you need to come in and start learning the back end stuff. And just, even if you're an absentee owner, you got to know what these numbers mean and how to do that. So my older daughter has been doing that because she's in the movie business, and the writer's strike was on last summer or a year ago. So it was really great that way. And she grew up in the store, right? She would take stuff off the shelves and dice when she was 2 years old and put them back in exactly the right spot. I always laugh at that. But yeah, so both of them kind of grew up around the store that way. But my younger one doesn't have the math to do the accounting stuff. The older one does. And they both have their own jobs and careers, of course. But the movie business allows a lot of flexibility in time sometimes. And it's been really good to get the different viewpoints. Though I do feel a little picked on now between my daughter and my manager who want to make changes. It's like, no, we like it the old way.
And when I think about like the investment, I don't know how much the original building cost at that time, and property values being what they are, could you in a million years think of somebody doing what you accomplished in today's marketplace as far as buying the building and devoting the resources to actually making it a game store?
Well, obviously somebody did in the US. I think it's a rental though. I always tell other stores, at conventions, is if they want one piece of advice, it's like, well, I usually give them two: diversify and buy a building. And, a few certainly have and said that was like the best advice ever. Because if we didn't own that building through the, real boom times in Calgary years ago, I'd have been closed because I couldn't afford the rent. There's just no possible way. I mean, games is not let's say, you're not going to make millions and millions of dollars out of there. I'm giving it up because I'm not selling the building, because that building has gone up obviously a lot in value. But there are downsides to a building, of course, like the maintenance. Like you talked about the walls and the renos and stuff. Like, well, the new floors went in were $75,000. The new roof was $75,000, and there was something else that turned out to be about $75,000. I mean, that's a lot of money for a game store. So the other thing is start putting money aside, is what I always tell other people. Put that 10% or a certain percentage aside all the time, and just leave it there for taxes and capital costs and whatever comes along. And that's actually made a big difference too, because it's pretty easy to just go buy more games otherwise.
And I guess as we kind of come to the close here, and I already kind of asked you, but the impact of the Sentry Box and the impacts of the community itself, what kind of level of, I imagine there's a level of satisfaction about being able to facilitate all these friendships over the years and the people that have been coming to the stores for 40 years.
Yeah, you don't really realize it sometimes on the impacts. I mean, it was actually your documentary that really highlighted a bunch of that, to be honest, as I watched that and saw the interviews with the customers. So I should reassure people, this documentary is not me babbling through the whole hour. It's lots of other people. But it was really neat to see that. And, you know, you get the odd letter like from people who move away and it's like, oh, I miss the Sentry Box. And it's very flattering, or when people come in and are impressed like that, or like the couple who got married. And when I asked them why, they wanted to get married in the store. And they basically said, because we didn't meet at the store, but we've had more fun together there than anywhere else we think we could get married. You know, it kind of, there's things like that kind of get you occasionally. I mean, you know, we went on forever on all the various stories over the years. Or you get an email, I don't think I mentioned this one before, from some lady in Australia who I'd sold way back a Settlers of Catan game because they were going back to Australia, and they played it on the plane and they met people. And she actually sent me an email after they got back, I think a year later or something, just thanking me, because she said, this changed our lives. You know, our friends are gamers, etc. And she actually came back into the store one time some years ago, and it was really neat to kind of meet her, because she was in visiting friends or family in Calgary again from Australia. So, you know, it's those kind of moments that you remember. Or even, you know, the staff who you had for years, you know, and sometimes help through trials and tribulations. And, you know, I've often kidded about having 28 foster children going on. And now I'm the senile old grandpa in some cases.
Well, Gord, I want to just say thank you for creating such a welcoming, incredible space and community at the Sentry Box. And I'll put all the links to the Sentry Box website and the documentary. And
the new one is coming soon. Honest to God, it's almost ready. The current one is terrible. I gotta be upfront on that.
Well, you can still go to the website and then follow on social media. And the Sentry Box in Calgary, Alberta, world's largest game store. I'm going to keep claiming that title for you because it is an incredible space. And if you are in Canada, Western Canada, you should definitely make the pilgrimage to check it out. It's well worth the travel for it. And but Gord, thanks for all your contributions to the community, and I just wish you all the best and your family the best in maintaining the Sentry Box for years to come.
Thanks for having me, Gary. Take care. It's great to talk to you again. Not that I haven't talked to you since the documentary. Yeah.